Hello viewers, in today's tutorial we are going to learn how to create OEM named credentials for database and host and use them to run OEM jobs to automate various database activities. A named credential is nothing but a combination of username and password stored in the OEM repository as a credential object in an encrypted form. We can associate these named credentials to different targets like database, host, agent, etc. and grant access on these named credentials to the users who use the OEM. The users can then perform various database operations and activities using those named credentials without actually knowing the username and password. This is a highly secure arrangement that OEM is offering to automate various database activities and jobs. A few examples of simple jobs are a OEM agent installation and deinstallation, agent startup and shutdown, database startup and shutdown, ARM and backups and restoration jobs, running an OS script across multiple database servers, running a SQL script across multiple database instances, etc. A few examples of advanced applications are agent upgrade, agent patching, database provisioning and patching, etc. In this video, we are going to create a normal database name credential using system user, a privileged database named credential using sysuser, a host named credential using Oracle user with remote SSH connectivity, a privileged host named credential using root user with remote SSH connectivity, a normal OS credential using a non-Oracle user named AuraDBA who has sudo access to Oracle and root user. The number 5 scenario is mostly applicable where remote SSH connectivity to privileged users like Oracle software owner, that is the Oracle user, and the root user are disabled for security reasons. In today's video, we will use 4 use cases using these named credentials to perform a simple create table as select statement using normal database credentials. Number 2, shut down and start up an agent using host credentials. Number 3, shut down and start up a database using database and host credentials. Number 4, install an agent using normal host credentials for a non-Oracle and non-root user who has sudo access to Oracle and root user. In the subsequent videos in this series, I will upload videos with more advanced uses of OEM named credentials to automate various activities on database and host targets. So let's start by logging to our OEM 13c system as an administrator or sysman user and identify our candidate databases and host targets. Sysman, go to targets, all targets, sort by target type. First, let's identify the hosts on which we will perform our experiments. Those are 2 Linux hosts, namely Linux 3 and Linux 4. We have 2 agents installed on those two hosts, which are Linux 3 and Linux 4 at port 3872. And there is one database installed on one of the hosts, that is Linux 3, and the database name is ORCL1. This is the database instance. Before we start creating the named credentials, let's validate if the username and password that we have for the databases and the host targets are actually working. Let's first connect to the server using a PuTTY session and validate the Oracle user. Login as Oracle, password Oracle, and it is working for the host Linux tree. Let's make another connection with root user, password Linux tree. It's working. Then Aura DBA user, password is password 123 with P capital. It's working. Now we'll also see if the sudo access for this particular Aura DBA user is working for root and the Oracle user. It's working. Sudo to root user is also working in our host Linux tree. Now let's go to the Linux 4, connect as root user, password Linux 4. It's working. Let's connect using Oracle user, password is also Oracle. It's working. Aura DBA user, password is password 123 and it's working. Now let's validate if it is able to do a sudo. It's able to do that. It's working. Now all our host credentials are working. Now let's validate the database credential that we have for system and sys user. So we have one instance called ORCL1 running on our Linux tree host. ORCL1. Now let's validate if our database credential for the sys and system user is working for the Oracle database instance, that is ORCL1, which is running on Linux tree. System, Oracle, and it's able to connect. And the sys user is also validated. Now we are ready to create our named credentials in OEM. To create the named credential, we'll go to Setup, Security, Named Credentials. First, we'll create a normal database named credential using system user. Click Create. Put a name like NC DB system. You can put any name you like, which will help you to identify the named credential. You can put some description here. The authentication target type will be database instance. And here the scope will have two options here, target or global. If you select target, it will be applicable for only one particular target. And if you select global, that named credential will be useful for multiple targets, multiple database instances here. So we'll select target because this particular named credential will be applicable only to one particular database. And the target name will select as our candidate database instance that is running on our host Linux tree. The name of the database is ORCL1. And we'll specify the username here. Password is Oracle. And the role will be normal. We'll test and save. You see at the left top corner the confirmation message about credential operation successful. So our first named credential using system user is created and saved as ncdb system. Number 2, we are going to create a privileged database named credential using sys user. Click create. Sys. Put a description there. Authentication type. Target type will be database instance. Database credentials, it will be target. The scope will be target. And the target name will be again our ORCL1 database. Then we'll specify the username. The password will be again Oracle. Role will be sysdba, and we'll test and save it. And it is successfully saved. Number 3, we'll create a host named credential using Oracle user with remote SSH connectivity to the server. Create. And see host Oracle. Put a description there. Authentication type will be host. Credential type will be host credential. Scope will be, let's select global here because we know the username that I am going to select here works for both the hosts. Username Oracle. Password will be Oracle. Confirm the password as Oracle. There will be no run privileges here. Test and save. As we have selected the scope as global, while testing, it will ask for specifying one particular target on which this named credential will be applicable. So let's select one of the candidate hosts, Linux 3 here, test and save, and the credential operation is successful. In the number 4, we will create a privileged host named credential using root user with remote SSH connectivity. Click create and see host root. Say this is specific to one particular server, so we'll specify the name of the server also here so that we come to know for which server this particular named credential works. Put some description there. Name credential for host with root user, host credential, target type host, specify the target name, Linux 3, root, the password is same as the name of the server, Linux 3, test and save, and it is successfully saved. And we'll create one more for the second candidate server. It is Linux 4. Same description. Host. Target name will be our second candidate server, that is Linux 4. Username root. Password Linux 4. Linux 4. Test and save. And it is saved. In the number 5, we'll create a normal OS credential or a host credential using a non-Oracle user named AuraDBA who has sudo access to Oracle and root user. Create. AuraDBA. Put some description there. Host credential. And this is a global host credential because the password for this particular AuraDBA user works for both our candidate servers. So we'll select global here. AuraDBA. Password is password 123. Password 123. We'll select a host here. Test and save. And it has been successfully saved. So we have created all the named credentials we will require for our experiments. Once we create our named credentials, the next step is to associate those named credentials to the relevant targets. And we do that by going to Setup, Security, Preferred Credentials, where we'll set the named credentials we created as preferred credentials for the corresponding targets. Let's first select the database instance. We select database instance, create Manage Preferred Credentials, and we select the database of our interest, that is ORCL1. For this, the normal database credential will be click Set NCDB system that we created before, test and save. And it has been successfully saved. Similarly, for the privileged database credential or SysDBA, we'll click Set NCDB sys, test and save, and it has been successfully saved. For the host credential for the database, again select that and click Set and see Host Oracle. We have a couple of options there, but we are selecting NC Host Oracle. Test and save, and it has been saved. Again, we go back to the previous screen. Security, Preferred Credentials. This time, we'll select the agent, and for Linux 3, we'll set it. The host credential will be Oracle. Test and save. For the host Linux 4 also, it will be Oracle, and it has been saved successfully. Again, go back to the previous screen. Preferred credentials. This time we'll select the host. Manage preferred credentials. We'll select the host for Linux 3. Set. The normal host credential will be as Oracle, and the privilege will be as root. For Linux 4, again, we'll select the host credential will be using Aura DBA user, the normal user that we created for the Linux 4 host. Test and save. And for the privileged, click set. We'll select the same named credential that is using the Aura DBA user. And it has been saved. Please note, if we are using a non-Oracle or non-root user, that is the Aura DBA user here, who is going to do a sudo to Oracle or root user to perform certain activities, we also have to set up privilege delegation for that particular user on that server. And we do that by going to setup, security, privilege delegation. For Linux 4, we'll click edit, sudo, we'll select sudo -u, run as command, click save, and it has been successfully saved for the Linux 4. Now we have to test it. Click test. Password 123, sudo run as Oracle, and it has been successfully tested. And we will do the same test for root user also. Run as root, and it has been successfully tested. So our privilege delegation is also successfully tested. Now we are all set to start our test cases. Now let's start with our first test case, that is to run a simple create table as select statement using normal database credential, and we'll create a simple table in our candidate database ORCL1, which is running in the host Linux tree. We'll go to enterprise, jobs, library, and we have to select the type of the job that we are going to create. By default, it's selecting OS command, but we are going to select it as SQL script. Click go, put a name, say simple test job, no automatic attempts, target type will be database instance, will not select any targets yet. The properties in the parameters will specify the create table as select statement, create table test table as select sysdate. We have to put an alias for the sysdate column here. We put it as sd from dual. So create table test table as select sysdate alias sd from dual is our simple select create table as select statement. Now in the credentials tab, we have to specify the named credentials that we created. Now as we already set the preferred credential for the database and the host, we don't have to select anything here because we are taking the option here as preferred. So it will automatically take the preferred credentials that we set. For the schedule, we'll select one time immediately. By default it is selected, and we'll save to the library, and the job has been saved. Now to run that job, we'll simply select it, the simple test job, and click submit. Now while submitting, it will give us the option to specify the target, the database target on which this job will run. We'll select ORCL1 that is running on Linux 3, click select, and then we click submit, and this instance of the job has been created as simple test job.to. We click there and see it is already succeeded. We see PL/SQL procedure successfully completed, table created. Let's go to the database. Select star from system.test table, and we see that a table with single column named SD with a value as today's date has been created. So this is our first test case with the named credential we created. Our second test case will be to shut down and start up an agent using the host credentials, and we'll select the agent running on Linux 4 in port 3872 as our candidate agent. But first, let's go to the server and see the agent status. Linux 4 will take our session that was established using Oracle user. We'll see the agent process. It is there. We go to the bin directory under agent home, and see the status using emctl status agent, and we see that the agent is running. Now using the host credentials, we'll shut down this agent and then again we'll start it up. Select the agent, right click, control, shut down. It is by default taking the preferred option, as we already set up the preferred credentials for the agent. It is automatically taking the host credential that we set up using Oracle user. We'll click shut it down. It will take a few moments, and the agent at Linux 4 host has been successfully stopped. We'll close this window and check at the server using the emctl status agent command, and we see that the agent is not running. Now we'll again start it up. Let's refresh the status because it was shown as up in the previous screen. Now it is shown as down. Control, start up. Again, it selected the preferred credential by default, host credential using Oracle, start up. It will take a few moments, and the agent on Linux 4 has been successfully started. Click close, go to the server and see the status again. And the agent is up. This ends our test case 2. Our test case 3 will be to shut down and start up a database using database and host credentials. So let's select the database instance, which is our candidate database ORCL1. We'll select ORCL1, which is running on Linux 3. And we just created one table there. So this is ORCL1. We'll select our candidate database instance here. That is the ORCL1 running on Linux 3. Right click, Oracle database, control, startup / shutdown. Now here, the first option is to specify the host credential and the second is the database credential. By default, it's taking the preferred host credential, that is using the Oracle user, which we already validated. And for the database credential, it is taking the preferred credential as the normal database credential that is using the system user. And we know that the system user is not allowed to shut down or start up a database. So this is not the correct option here. We will use the preferred credential for sysdba database access. Now I'll go and click OK. It will ask for a confirmation. We'll click yes. It will take a few moments and it has been completed, and we can see that the status of the database is shown as down. Let's go to the server and validate. There is no ORCL instance here. So the instance is down. Now again, we are going to start it up. Control, startup shutdown. We have to select the credentials here. By default, it's taking the preferred credentials. The host credentials are okay, but the database credentials are not correct because system user is not able to start it up. So we have to use the sysdba, the sys user, which will use the sysdba access. Click OK. For the confirmation, again, click yes and wait for a few moments. And it has been completed successfully. We can see the database status is shown as up. Let's go to the server. And it is up. Our fourth test case will be to install an agent using normal host credential for a non-Oracle and non-root user who has sudo access to Oracle and root user. And for this, our candidate server will be Linux 4. Our candidate agent that is running on the host Linux 4 is up, but before we are able to install a new agent, we have to decommission this agent, the existing agent, to remove all its references in the repository, and also we have to uninstall it from the host. The first requirement to decommission an agent is to shut it down. Right click, control, shut down. Using the preferred credentials, shut down. We'll see the status of the agent. agent is not running. Now refresh the page and see the agent status is shown as not reachable. We'll right click, go to target setup, agent decommission, and the confirmation that the agent is down. We'll click continue, and along with the agent decommission, all the targets monitored by that agent will also be removed. All references of those targets will be removed from the repository. We click continue. Okay. And the operation has been successfully completed, and we see there is no agent from the Linux 4 host. Now I'll validate by going to the server and see if there is any agent running. There is no agent running. Now the next step is to uninstall the agent so that we can install a new agent here. To uninstall an agent, we have to run a Perl script in the agent home directory. First, we have to come out of the agent home directory. And set a few environment variables. Export Oracle agent home. Export Oracle home as the agent home. Export the path variable so that it has the Perl executable in it. And finally, we'll execute the Perl script to deinstall the agent. Just to validate if the directory has been gone, and it is gone. And now we are going to install the agent in the same location as it was before. First, let's create the agent base directory. To install an agent, we'll go to Setup, Add Target manually, Install agent on host. We'll add the host name here. Linux 4. It's a 64-bit. Click Next. Installation base directory will be the one that we just created. For the normal host name credential and the privileged host name credential, we will create a new named credential here. Username will be auradba. Password will be password 123. Password 123. Run privilege will be sudo. run as Oracle. We'll save it as OraDBA to Oracle. Click OK. Similarly, for the root credentials, we select OraDBA, password 123, password 123, run privilege will be sudo to root user, nc host OraDBA to root. We'll save it with a name. Click OK. Click Next. Verify all the information are correct. Click Deploy Agent. And the process is going to take a few minutes. We can set the refresh frequency to something lower so that we get a quicker update. Now the installation has been completed. We see the status as agent deployment succeeded. Just to validate one more time, and all the individual steps have been successfully completed, and our agent installation is done. Click Done. Go to All Targets. And see the agent installed on our host Linux 4 is up. We'll go to the server. Check the status. And the agent is up and running. So viewers, I hope you liked my video and found it useful. And if you did, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more similar videos that I am uploading every week for the Oracle DBAs. In the second part of this video series, I am going to upload a video with more sophisticated and advanced uses of name credentials to automate OEM jobs on database and host targets.